a video head impulse test. This has become hot as can be. This is like the hottest thing in vestibular right now. I never thought it would make it when I first heard about it because there's no CPT code for it. And the equipment, even though it's relatively inexpensive, it's still, you know, it's a little bit up there. It's like $14,000, okay? If you get it as an option on a micromedical system, then it's only $8,900. But as a standalone system, and most of them are standalone systems, it's around $14,000. Anyway, but regardless of the cost of it, it ended up being very, very popular. Last year, I don't know how many we sold, but it was I was very, very surprised at how many of these that we installed. And the people that are getting them are excited about it. I just put one in yesterday or the day before at the VA hospital in Augusta, Georgia. Anyway, I guess you know, especially if you've been working with this or if you were at the presentation this morning, this is all based on the VOR, the vestibular ocular reflex. And a lot of times patients ask you, wait a minute, I'm sick, I'm dizzy, I lose my balance, I'm nauseous. What are you doing? You're putting goggles on and you say you're going to measure my eye movement. What does my eye movement have to do with my dizziness? So you have to explain to them the vestibular system, which is like a motion detector in both ears, and how that works, and how it controls the oculomotor system. And one easy way to do it is this. I don't know if you've ever done this before, but you can demonstrate it to yourself and anybody by just having them hold their hand out and notice the details on their hand. The knuckles, the ring they might be wearing, their fingernails, all the details in their hand should be crystal clear to them. And if they move their head like this and still look at their hand, all the details are still crystal clear. I see all the details in my knuckles, my fingernails, the ring I'm wearing, everything, no problem. I can read my watch as I turn my head, no problem. But if I turn my hand at the same speed as I was turning my hand instead, now I've lost all of the detail. It's all blurred out. And I can't read my watch, and I can't see any of the details of my knuckles or fingernails or ring or anything. And why is that? Well, when I turned my head, my vestibular system was going, uh-oh, he's turning his head, and it was adjusting my eyes for equal and opposite movement to compensate for my head movement. And that's how we can walk through space. We can run and jog. And my daughter runs marathons. Every single week she runs a marathon somewhere. And she's run marathons all over the country. Chicago Marathon, out in LA, down in New Orleans. And so for 26 miles she's running full speed, and yet everything is crystal clear. And she sees the sights while she's at it. She just did one in Disneyland. But that's because her vestibular system, her balance, her motion detectors in her ears were automatically adjusting the eyes to compensate for all that movement. Otherwise, everything would be blurred. Well, that's the whole principle of the vestibular ocular reflex. The connection that there is between the vestibular system through the central nervous system to the oculomotor system. Well, that's what makes all of this possible. The product that we have, it's manufactured by InterAcoustics. InterAcoustics, their vestibular is part of Micromedical now. The two companies are combined. And their system is called an EyeSeeCam. One word, EyeSeeCam. E-Y-E, C-Cam. E-Y-E-C, S-E-E, cam. Okay, anyway, this is what these goggles look like. They're very lightweight, and this is the camera. And you could take this camera and you can switch it to the other eye. Sometimes you have one eye that tracks. If you told the patient, watch my finger, don't move your head, just your eyes, and follow my finger. If you see one eye staring out in space and the other eye is following the finger, well then put the camera on the other side. This camera can be moved over to the other side to record off of either ear, either eye. The reason that there's only one camera instead of two, it's monocular instead of binocular, is because weight is very important. This has to be as light as possible. This camera also has a motion detector in it, that's here, and the camera part is here. And it's a very, very high speed, many, many frames per second, over 200 frames per second. Very high speed, very high resolution camera. It's only recently that there were cameras fast enough to be able to record the type of corrective saccade that takes place in a head impulse test. And then you have a USB cord that connects to the computer that comes with it. And you even have a little laser projector there that's going to project the calibration stimulus on the wall. Okay? So what do you do when you do a head impulse test? Well, you set the patient up with the goggles and you center the eye so that the eye is not offset to the left, right, up or down, so that it's straight and in the middle of the viewing area on the software. You perform a calibration if you want to, or if you don't, it'll use a default calibration. And then you do lateral pulses. Lateral pulses are the horizontal one, lateral impulses. And then if you want to, you can do the LARP and the RALP, which would be the vertical canals. And then if you did, you would have an actual response from all 6 canals, 3 on both sides. You set the patient at least 1.5 meters from a wall, and you put a dot on that wall that's going to be center. I noticed at Children's Hospital they have this set up in their balance center, and they had a brilliant way of doing it. They put a piece of Velcro so that they can move this little center target up and down depending on the height of the patient. So that was an excellent way to do that. But you'll want that because the patient, you'll want a visual target to be about 1.5 meters away from the patient. Maybe 5 feet would be good. And not only that, because that's what they're going to be looking at during these tests. Right? And it should be at eye level, with them sitting in a chair that has that is not a swivel chair, and that has not good armrests on it, so that they can be solid while you do the head impulses. Right? And there's a patient sitting there, and that laser projector that's built into the goggles is projecting those targets for center, right, left, up, and down. All they do is have the center one right on top of that center target that you had put there in that place. And then that's just used for calibration. If the patient can't calibrate, then you simply, if you try it and it doesn't work out, when you leave it, it asks you, do you want to use this or do you want to use the default? So you could say default if it didn't work out. And if you don't want to calibrate, just choose the default. And it'll use a default gain that is appropriate for the age of the patient. So when we do the lateral, we call the horizontal canal lateral, when we do the lateral impulses, we're moving the head quickly from left to right, and just moving the head about 15 degrees, and it takes some practice. If you've ever done this, the first time you do it, you're not doing it right. And it takes a little practice. And this piece of equipment has built into it a detector of whether it is a good impulse or not good impulse. What makes it good? It has to be fast enough, and it doesn't have to be too far. Only 15, 20 degrees would be enough. But it's a matter of it being fast enough. So we should do them so that they're relatively rapid and they're unpredictable. It's not just left, right, left, right, left, right, but maybe left, left, right, left, right, 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 left, and random. And small amplitude, 10 to 15 degrees. Head velocity, though, has to be fast. Has to be 150 degrees per second, between 100 and 250 degrees per second, and do 5 or 6 on both sides, rightward and leftward, and you've got it. And though you can hold the patient when you do this, you can hold them on the head, we happen to get better results holding them on the chin like this. And it takes a little bit of practice, but the system has built into it, as you'll see here, that green check mark means that was a good impulse. So when I do them, I'm looking at the screen of the computer, and if they see a green check, I know that was a good one. If I see a red X, I said, oh, that was a bad one. And I have it set in the protocol so it only takes the good ones. And this is a good training thing. When I put the one in the VA in Augusta, I said, do you want that on? And they're, oh yeah, it's going to take us a while before because it just takes a little practice to be able to do that right. And it's much easier to do the lateral ones than to do the vertical ones. So when you do both eyes, it looks like this. You get a red X if it was a pulse that usually it just wasn't fast enough. But if the head motion, this is head motion, this is eye motion. If the head motion wasn't fast enough, then it wouldn't fall in this red area, and for left, it's this blue area. But if it was short of that, or if it was over that, you turned it too fast. If it wasn't within that range, then you'd have a red X instead of that check mark. So it makes it easy to do it right. And I also have the protocol set for there, so it only takes the good ones. The ones that were X's, it doesn't even record those. So at the end, you end up with a good recording. And if you want to do the RALP and the LARP, you can. That takes a little bit more practice. I say perfect the laterals, because the laterals are going to be the ones you do the most and are going to give you the most information. If you do the verticals, then it's only 15 degrees up and down. We have them turn their head 45 degrees, but still look at the center target, and then we're moving their head with downward and upward impulses. Here's an example of somebody doing that. In this case, we do hold them on the head. But you can use different techniques, and you find people that use different techniques depending on what has worked for them with their equipment. In the end, you end up with a plot like this. What we're looking at here is head movement versus eye movement, which should be equal and opposite, just like this. And no corrective saccades. The head moved like this, and the eye moved like that at the same time. That would be a perfect recording. But in a case where you have a disorder, vestibular disorder, you end up with something like this. The head moved like this, but the eye movement was not equal and opposite. It was less in amplitude. And as a matter of fact, it made, after the head movement had stopped, there was a catch-up saccade, because we told the patient to look at this, to be looking at this target all the time. So they had to make a catch-up saccade back to the target. And that kind of saccade is called an overt saccade, because that's the one you could see. You can actually do these lateral pulses, impulses, and if you watch the eyeballs, you have them patient watching your nose, and if you watch their eyeballs, you can see this saccade, this corrective saccade that's done once you're done with the head movement. You can see the corrective saccade as they come back to the target. So we wouldn't necessarily need equipment to record that. The only reason we have equipment now is because it's only recently that we had cameras that were fast enough and high enough sampling rate and high enough resolution to make it practical. And another reason that we need this kind of system is you could have a covert saccade. This one you would never be able to see because it occurred drawing this catch-up saccade occurred drawing the head movement, not when the head movement had stopped. The catch-up saccade is in the middle of it. And so that we would have to have the equipment, or we'd never be able to see that physically. So when you're done, you end up with something like this. And the beauty of the equipment is it not only gives you the plot of head movement versus eye movement, in this case the eye movement is green, but it also gives you an analysis of gain so you can know that you interpreted this right. Now if I looked at this, I'd say there are no catch-up saccades in here. But if I wondered about it, if I saw this and I said, is that an overt saccade there, this little thing? Well, all I'd have to do is look at the numbers and I'd say absolutely not, because the gain should be 1.0 and the gain for left and right should be the same. So these plots, which is simply the gain, the comparison between head movement and eye movement, if they were the same, the gain would be 1, right? And of course, the blue ones are for leftward impulses, and the red ones are for rightward impulses, and they're all around 1.0, and they're clustered together. There isn't a difference between left and right. So I know that it's normal. I might wonder about this if I only looked at the data and said, is this a covert saccade here, or is this just happen to be random eye movement? Well, all I would have to do, again, is look at my plot here, look at my gains, right? 1.1, close enough. 1.1 on both sides, very symmetrical, no problem. Okay? The micromedical equipment shows it like this. Besides showing a plot of the gain, and the average gain is represented by these two lines, was 0.9 on one side and 0.8 on the other side. Not perfect. But another way to look at it is the gain asymmetry, and it's 7%. And 7 is the magic number in head impulse testing, right? That you don't want asymmetry of more than 7%, and you don't want a gain that is less than 0.7 or less. You don't want that. You want it to be 0.7 or higher. And so this patient still makes it, he's on just the edge of normal. But now when I look at the actual data, if you were used to looking at these, you'd say, hey, that's clean. I don't see any saccades in there. And this patient would pass. So it's good to have, what I'm saying is it's good to have the actual raw tracing of eye movement versus head movement. I like the way this is plotted. But I'm really happy to have these graphs and those numbers too, because they back you up, where you can depend on your interpretation of this. Here's a patient that did have covert saccades, right here. And these are obvious in the tracing. And then we can tell over here too, because look, the gain on the good side is 0.67, and on the bad side 0.39. Whoa. And it's a left side problem. And look at the asymmetry ratio. It's 24%. Remember we said 7%. It's going to need to be 7% and under. So that made that pretty easy. Here's another one. It's obvious covert saccade here and an overt saccade here. And that happens where you have both. And it's obvious that there is a ton of asymmetry. Okay, on the right side, the right impulses, 0.9 is the gain. That's close enough to 1. But this one is 0.6, and that's under our 0.7 limit. This is the way the end result looks like. This is what the end result looks like on the IceCam. And so we see the raw data for head versus eye movement. This is a normal patient, done very well. Whoever did this has a lot of experience. And then you have several things in analysis. You have the plot of gain and the velocity. See, this is telling me that each one of these impulses was over 150 and under 250. So these were the right speed, and they're clustered together. There isn't an asymmetry there. When we look here at asymmetry, we're looking at, this is velocity regression, this is called. This looks symmetrical. In fact, there's a number, I just can't see it here. The gain on one side, I think, is 0.91, and on the other side is 1.02. I mean, it's very, very close. And the asymmetry is 4%. So that's fine. It's within normal limits. I also have another gain measurement here, and this gain is done at 60 milliseconds into the impulse. That's when we should have the highest velocity, right? And we're looking at the gain there, and even the standard deviation to see how clean these impulses were. And that gain should be very close to 1. Certainly when it is less than 0.7, that's when we consider it abnormal. So you got a lot of data there where you can't misinterpret this. And once you get used to looking at that, it's easy. We're looking at the raw traces, looking for saccades. We're looking at the instantaneous gain number. How close to 1 is that for both sides? We're looking at the gain asymmetry, and we don't want that to be over 7%. And we're looking at the raw gain, making sure it's within the right velocity, that these impulses were all between 150 and 250 degrees per second, and that there isn't an asymmetry between left and right, that they're all clustered together. Gives you a lot of data. This slide summarizes everything as far as how to interpret all 4 pieces of data to be absolutely sure about your conclusion. Here's a patient that had, obvious corrective saccades here, and look at the asymmetries. Asymmetry all over the place. The asymmetry is 27%. Here's a gain of 0.85, and the other side the gain is 0.39. Right? Very asymmetrical. Look at the gain plots here. Left side way down. Nowhere near ideal, which would be a gain of 1, of course. Same thing over here. 0.76, yeah, we made it on the right, but we didn't make it on the left with 0.27 for gain, right? Gain is when gain is 1.0, that's when eye movement and head movement are identical, right? If we did everything, if we did the laterals and we did the LARPs and the RALPs, then we would end up with data on all 6 semicircular canals like this. So you have a plot on all 6 semicircular canals, and you really have done comprehensive testing of the vestibular system. Add the VEMP test to this, and you really have a very complete diagnostic set.